A woman entered the hospital already in labor, but the great challenge that the doctors could never have imagined was what would be born from that poor woman. Everyone in the delivery room was completely paralyzed, speechless, and without reaction. It was something truly shocking and never before seen in the heart of the scorching heat of an ordinary day in the city of Santa Rita, Paraíba, located in Brazil. Dr. Mauro, a young 25-year-old doctor just out of university, was actively working in the general hospital. With a smile that contrasted with the seriousness of the environment, he attended patient after patient, always with dedication and a watchful eye. The hospital was in its usual state of agitation, crowded hallways, people moving from one place to another, a mix of anxiety and hope in the air. Dr. Mauro, however, maintained his calm even with the suffocating heat that offered no relief and without a trace of air conditioning to ease the tension. "Good morning, sir," he would say with a voice that brought peace as he started yet another consultation with an elderly patient, carefully checking vital signs and prescribing necessary medications. With children, his heart melted a little more. He greeted them with kind words and a comforting gaze while conducting the exams with a care that only a doctor who truly loves his profession could have. Mauro knew that each person who came through his door carried a unique story, a particular suffering, and he made an effort to pay attention to everyone. Even when the day was especially chaotic, he was the only doctor on duty, and the lack of colleagues only increased the responsibility and dedication he already had by nature. There was no room for complaints. He chose medicine to save lives, and there he was, doing what he could with a heart full of purpose and a mind brimming with knowledge. It was a hot day, but the human heat that he brought to each consultation was even greater. Dr. Mauro felt a knot in his stomach, that strange sensation that something out of the ordinary was about to happen. The day had been a true challenge, with the hospital's routine more frantic than ever. He barely had time to blink, let alone breathe, between consultations and emergencies that seemed endless, but he was there, strong and firm, because he knew that his presence made all the difference. The prescriptions for medications and the quick instructions for patients had become almost automatic, yet he never lost his genuine concern for the well-being of each person who came to him, and it was in the midst of this rush that the strange premonition came true. Suddenly, the tension in the room was interrupted by two men who entered carrying a pregnant woman. She was unconscious, and they, in complete desperation, shouted for help with a mix of care and urgency. The men placed her on the ground, kneeling beside her. Immediately, some nurses gathered around, ready to help. Meanwhile, the men tried to explain what had happened with the woman. The concern etched on their faces was clear. It was time to act, and Dr. Mauro knew that every second counted to save the life of the woman and her baby. "I was sitting there, nibbling on a snack and chatting when I saw a woman from a distance. She was walking unsteadily, groaning in pain and holding her belly. Suddenly, she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The two guys who were with me, one still catching his breath from the run, explained the scene they had witnessed. She had been walking unsteadily, crying out in pain, and suddenly fainted," one of them said, his voice trembling with nerves. The other, with a shaky voice, completed, "She must have gone into labor." Dr. Mauro appeared running, thanking them, as the woman was quickly moved to the delivery room with him closely following. With the skill that only an experienced doctor possesses, Mauro quickly put on gloves and began coordinating the nurses. "Saline solution with adrenaline," he ordered, and the team, with the agility that the urgency of the moment demanded, quickly prepared the injection. It was an attempt to bring the young woman back from her fainting while labor was advancing at full speed. The young woman, likely around 23 years old, lay there unconscious. And Dr. Mauro's heart shrank when he saw the fragility of her life. She wasn't disheveled, but it was clear that she wasn't having her best day. There was a certain vulnerability about her that made Mauro feel even more responsible for her health. When the medical team administered the injection that Dr. Mauro had prescribed, the young woman jolted awake and began to scream, a sound that reverberated through the hospital halls. These were not just screams of physical pain, but of deep and devastating suffering. The nurses, who had seen it all, were horrified by the intensity of her cries. "Help! Help! My baby! My baby!" she screamed, crying with a face contorted in agony. the general physician and the nurses quickly assessed the situation and realized that a natural birth would not be possible. "Doctor, she needs an emergency C-section. The situation is becoming critical," they said, urgency clear in their voices. Dr. Morrow knew that every second counted to save the life of the mother and the baby. He coordinated the team with the efficiency and speed that the situation required, while the desperate cries of the young woman echoed through the hospital, a cry for help that brought everyone back to the reality of the life-or-death struggle happening in that room. The problem was that Dr. Morrow was not a surgeon. His specialty was general medicine and emergencies. And he was not trained to perform a C-section, but in this situation, with the hospital overwhelmed and no other professionals available, he knew he had to act. "Prepare the operating room now," he said, his heart pounding and his mind racing with the gravity of what he was about to do. He knew he was about to perform a procedure far beyond his training, yet there was no time for hesitation. The lives of the woman and the baby were in his hands, as the nurses scrambled to prepare everything. Morrow kept calm, holding on to the memories of his university lessons and training, mentally reviewing each stage of the procedure. The woman continued to scream, her body twisted in pain as her desperate hands tore at the sheets. Camilla's eyes met the doctor's, and he knew he couldn't let fear take over. He needed to be strong and confident to give her the hope she so desperately needed. He took a deep breath and began the procedure. Every step was a challenge, each second a fight for life. Dr. Morrow knew that regardless of the outcome, he had done everything possible, and that was what mattered. For a brief moment, Dr. Morrow exchanged a look with the patient, and there he saw the desperation and the trust she placed in him. "Everything will be fine, I'll take care of you," he said, trying to stay calm and convey a confidence he didn't truly feel. His words were important, but he knew his actions were even more decisive. Finally, with the operating room ready, they began to move the stretcher. Taking a deep breath, he prepared for the challenge ahead. They took Daniela, the young woman whose name they had just learned, into the delivery room and administered anesthesia. She was terrified, but the nurses were by her side, explaining the procedure and trying to calm her. Daniela asked to stay awake during the birth of her baby. "I want to see him be born, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion and fear. Dr. Morrow nodded, assuring her they would do everything they could to ensure she stayed awake and could witness such a special moment. He knew that this birth would bring about a change she would never forget. As the baby began to be born, the importance of the mother's presence and awareness was clear. Even with the anesthesia taking effect and the screaming subsiding, Daniela still silently cried. Tears running down her face, her thoughts were a chaotic jumble, filled with worry. How will I care for a baby, given my situation? She wondered. The prospect of raising a child seemed overwhelming, and fear and insecurity consumed her. Dr. Morrow, his heart racing but with a calm demeanor, approached her. "I'm going to start now, dear. To be completely honest, as the only doctor here and not being a surgeon, I promise I will do everything with care and calm. You're in good hands," he said. Trying to sound as confident as possible, Daniela, still somewhat tense, looked at the young doctor. His reassuring look made her feel that he could help her. The nursing assistants, each in their place and attentive to Morrow's instructions, began preparing everything for the delivery. Despite the nervousness, the trust Daniela placed in Morrow and the team was palpable. A silent bond that connected them in that delicate and significant moment. The young woman, with a heart heavy with fear but with an inner strength she didn't know she possessed, clung to the doctor's words and tried to calm herself. She knew she needed to be strong for her child, who depended on her. Meanwhile, a flood of desperate thoughts overwhelmed her mind. How will I care for a baby? I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. I can't lose him. Dr. Morrow began the procedure with meticulous care. Each movement performed with precision, his mind completely focused. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The room was tense, but everyone worked in harmony. Each person focused on their part of the process to ensure Daniela's and the baby's safety. The only sound in the operating room was the silence, occasionally interrupted by the soft sounds of instruments and the controlled breathing of the team. When Morrow reached the baby, a sigh of relief escaped his lips. Thank God, he thought, with a sense of duty fulfilled. But what happened next? Nothing could have prepared him for. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw the baby. and an involuntary gasp escaped his throat. What he saw left him speechless and completely stunned. "What's happening, doctor?" everyone asked almost simultaneously, their voices reflecting concern and alarm. The entire team froze, their gazes fixed on the young doctor, trying to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Daniela, who had been trying to stay calm until then, became even more alarmed upon hearing Moro's reaction. "Please tell me what's happening. Is my baby all right?" she implored, her voice heavy with fear and anxiety. Daniela tried to lift her head to see what was happening, but she was too weak. The pain and fear drained her strength. Carefully, the doctor brought the baby out, and awe filled the room. "What was that?" Daniela screamed, agony evident in her voice. Her eyes were filled with fear. Concern filled her, and her heart raced as turbulent feelings mixed inside her. The anxiety of not knowing what was happening was unbearable. Finally, Moro showed the baby to the mother, and the moment her eyes landed on the baby, she too was left speechless, incredulous. "It can't be." She began to cry, tears running down her face. What she saw wasn't just one baby, but two, and not just two babies. They were twins, conjoined at the top of their heads. Desperate, Moro tried to calm her. "Daniela, there are surgeries for cases like this. We'll assess the situation and see the possibilities. Everything will be okay," he said, trying to sound hopeful. He examined the babies more closely and realized that they only had a small part of their skulls fused. "They may be able to be separated with specialized surgery. Yes, we need to do more tests, but I believe there is a good chance we can separate them," he explained, trying to comfort the distressed mother, still tearful. Daniela asked to hold her babies. "I don't know how to care for them. I didn't know how to care for one, let alone two. How can I handle a surgery?" she said, gazing at the faces of her children. Everyone in the room was moved by the situation, feeling the pain and anguish of a mother who had barely begun to experience motherhood. The nurses tenderly cared for the babies, cleaning them and placing them in an incubator beside their exhausted mother, whose heart was heavy. Daniela couldn't stop thinking about the uncertain future ahead of her. Even after his shift ended, Moro couldn't forget the situation of the mother. He went to Daniela's room, moved by a mix of curiosity and a desire to help. During the conversation, he learned that Daniela was only 23 years old, and that the pregnancy had not been planned. She had escaped from the abuse of her boyfriend and spent the pregnancy alone, working various jobs to support herself. Daniela had no idea she was expecting twins, let alone that they would be born conjoined. "What am I going to do now? I need to care for my children, but how can I do it? Who will want to care for babies who were born attached?" Daniela thought, a mix of fear and uncertainty consuming her. The young doctor looked at the mother with a tight heart. He knew the situation was complicated, but he promised himself to do everything possible to help. Daniela needed hope, and he was determined to offer it. Moro felt a knot in his chest. He wanted to help Daniela, but he saw that the situation was difficult. It was then that the general practitioner stood up and made a firm decision. "You and your children can stay at my house," he said with determination, a statement that left no room for doubt. He knew it was an unusual situation, but he couldn't allow a mother to be separated from her babies, despite being newly graduated and having limited resources. He was determined to do whatever it took. Daniela didn't know how to express her gratitude. Tears streamed down her face, showing a feeling of relief and gratitude. Regarding the separation surgery, Moro explained that it would be a hemispherectomy and that they would assess the possibility of performing the procedure. He tried to convey hope, assuring her that they would find a solution. When Daniela was discharged, Moro had already prepared a room for her and the babies in his apartment. The room was simple but cozy, with two small beds, one of them temporarily made into a crib, and a few toys for the little ones. Moro's smile when welcoming them was warm, making Daniela feel at home. He had created an environment where they could rest and start a new life together. Everything was ready for them to feel comfortable, safe, and secure. Moro spared no effort in mobilizing the hospital and his contacts, raising donations for the surgery of the Siamese babies, Gabriel and Guilherme, as their mother called them. He used all the resources and connections he had to ensure the babies had the best chance possible. The response from people was overwhelming. In just 3.5 months, they managed to raise the full amount needed for the surgery. Now they only had to wait for the children to grow a bit more and become strong enough for the procedure. Meanwhile, Morrow began to develop a special bond with the babies and with Daniela. When Morrow returned from the hospital, he always found at home the hope of a new beginning. The days that had once been filled with exhaustion and tension were now filled with laughter and precious moments. He thought it was comforting to know that even after a tiring day, he would come home to hear the babies' laughter and talk with Daniela, who had become a great companion. Morrow felt that somehow the arrival of the babies and Daniela had brought a new joy into his life, a feeling of home and purpose. They had formed a family, united by the strength of love and the hope for a better future. He dedicated himself to caring for the babies and Daniela with a love that grew every day. The daily tasks blended with moments of joy and affection. And despite the approaching surgery, there was a feeling of unity and strength that surrounded this small family. Morrow knew that the surgery was necessary and brought hope, but it also involved risks. That's why he read and studied everything he could about separation surgeries for conjoined twins, wanting to be prepared for any challenge that might arise. The days passed, and the babies grew stronger in preparation for the big day. The surgery date drew nearer, and with it came a mix of emotions that filled everyone. Anxiety, fear, hope, and faith were constant companions for Daniela and Morrow, who faced each day with courage, knowing that mutual love and support were crucial for the journey ahead. They firmly believed that everything would turn out well, that the babies would be fine, and that their lives would change from that moment onward. The certainty that the babies would be okay united Daniela and Morrow in the young doctor's apartment, where love and unity were palpable. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for having decided to help Daniela and her children. When the babies turned 1 year old, the separation surgery was performed. The procedure became the talk of the town, with everyone commenting and following Daniela's story, the doctors, and the twins. Although the surgery was considered relatively simple due to the small area of connection between the babies' skulls, it left Daniela worried. Her heart was filled with anxiety, and the fear that something could go wrong consumed her. Morrow was by her side, holding her hand and offering all the support possible, and, of course, over the course of that year, a loving relationship blossomed between them. The friendship bond that formed between Daniela and Morrow began to grow. Adversity and mutual care transformed into true love. Morrow fell in love not only with the young woman but also with the children, Gabriel and Guilherme. He would never be their biological father, but he felt that those little ones were his children in his heart. The surgery was a success, the best surgeons in the region were present, and the operation went perfectly. When the babies were finally brought to their feet and handed over to the parents, it was a moment of immense joy. Daniela and Morrow held Gabriel and Guilherme in their arms, their hearts overflowing with relief and happiness. Tears of joy streamed from everyone's eyes, including the nurses and doctors who had been part of this story. The entire city celebrated the victory of this unlikely family. Daniela, with the curious eyes of the babies reflecting the light from the recovery room, held them in her arms with a look of gratitude and love. Morrow stood by her side, feeling a deep sense of relief and happiness that words couldn't express. "We did it," Daniela whispered, looking at her partner with a glimmer of love in her eyes. "Yes, we did," he replied, smiling as he hugged both her and the babies. "Now, we'll build a life together." The family, which began with such great challenges, had overcome all the difficulties and remained united. Morrow, Daniela, Gabriel, and Guilherme formed an indestructible bond, and love that had grown out of adversity and now shone with the strength of overcoming and unity. The journey had been long, full of challenges, and they would still face many ahead. But the love and determination of everyone involved had led them to victory. The doctor lived happy days, always surrounded by people who loved him and awaited him at home when he returned from the hospital. This story, which started with a decision to help, transformed the lives of many people and had a beautiful, happy ending. After watching the story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.